Welcome back to Well and Worthy Life. Okay, I cannot wait for you to meet my new friend. I know I always say that, my new friend, but she really is. I feel like I've known her for a while through another friend. So today I have with me Paige Donnelly. She is a licensed clinical social worker, associate, and private practice therapist at Mindspace Counseling. She's got 8+ years as a mental health clinician working in behavioral health hospitals within the prison system. Oh my goodness, with death row inmates. I can't even imagine this. And with hospice patients and their families. She is based in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and available for virtual sessions with individuals located anywhere in North Carolina. Her specialization is grief and loss, life transitions, and anxiety. So, welcome, Paige. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Yes. So I saw a post that you made on Instagram, and it was like, I can't remember exactly, but it was like grief is life transitions. And anyway, a lot of different things. And I couldn't help but think of my clients. Sometimes they have major grief when and I don't mean to make light of this. I mean, it's a big thing when they hit menopause, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think grief is totally on a spectrum, like many things and many emotions and many situations. So, yeah, I mean, grief can range from the actual loss of a person or the loss of kind of your own identity going through different life transitions, maybe kids kind of leaving the home,
Yes.
maybe, yeah, just the changes that happen in life and with ourselves and our loved ones.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
So many. And and we talked about this briefly on the phone. I think we naturally think about grief when we think about we've lost somebody. I've lost both of my parents. And so that grief, you kind of understand that a little bit more. But sometimes we don't understand that we can experience the same range of emotions because isn't there a range of emotions that is pretty much like almost normal, I should say? Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so the most well known is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's model of, I think it's of death and dying. But a lot of people use it for grief and grieving, and that's
Mhm.
the DABDA. So it's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So that is very normalized. But even with that, I mean, there's so many other emotions that can accompany grief. Guilt
Mhm.
is like such a common one
Ooh, yeah.
that people talk a lot about in counseling, but I don't feel like it's out there as much. So
Mhm.
yeah, I mean there's just so many that can
Right.
come along with it.
And so, like I said, normally we think of, okay, grief, if you lose a loved one or a friend or whatever, but you don't think about grief in life transitions. I mean, honestly, I didn't think about grief in life transitions like menopause, like empty nester, like moving across the country, like you just did. There are big life transitions. And I see it in my clients a lot as that empty nester, that person who all of a sudden she's had a purpose. She had this purpose of taking care of her kids. And that purpose doesn't just go away because they go off to college, but she's not sure because she was real involved with her kids and all of her activities and her friendships all revolved around her kids, and now all of a sudden they're gone, and she's like has this extra time, but she doesn't know how to fill it, and she looks in the mirror a lot of times, and she goes with the outward appearance right
Mhm.
first, and then she deals with everything or doesn't deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, with any huge, I mean, that's a huge loss having your kids leave the home. And especially if you were very involved and, used to seeing them very frequently, just adjusting to that is massive. And with any loss can come along, it can come along with depression and depressive symptoms and difficulty, just getting out of bed, putting one foot in front of the other. Even that negative self-talk can come up
Mm.
during that time, and that's so normal. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so when you work with a client that they're going through, whether it be grief and loss, life transitions, anxiety, and I love to know that you work virtually because I think that is so helpful. So I'm sure it's just like everything else in life, it's all differing on everybody's and where they are at that stage, right? But what are some things that you maybe questions you ask them or things that you have them do?
I mean, if it's about grief and loss, whether it's somebody who actually died or if it's the loss of a child leaving the home. I mean, I think the biggest priority is processing and allowing space to talk about it because not everyone in their life is going to want to spend that time always listening to those issues. So therapy is that hour session or however long people do, maybe 45 minutes. But it's just that time to allow the person to go through their emotions and to say what's coming up because in life a lot of times we avoid these emotions and then they can just kind of fester. So that's like my biggest part within counseling. Aside from that, I like to go through what they're experiencing day to day, what their routine is looking like, how they're caring for themselves is a huge piece of coping, normalizing the emotions that come up. There's this one grief psychoeducation handout that I created that's like all the different aspects of our life. So spiritually, physically, emotionally, cognitively, and I think there's one more, but I can't think of it at the moment. But with all of those, there's just countless symptoms that can arise within that grief and loss period. As far as like life transitions, I think it's very similar. Just kind of noting what's coming up for them, talking through it, normalizing. And then I love coping skills. So I used to be a recreational therapist and they used to do groups teaching healthy coping skills. So different mindfulness techniques or relaxation techniques. Big fan of breath work and just easy, accessible things that they can use daily. So we practice in session and then they can use it outside of the sessions too, in between.
Yeah, I love that. And I love what you were saying that, you know, giving them space to talk because you're right. No matter what's happening in your life, I mean, nobody wants to hear it over and over and over again. And to be honest with you, I don't know if I ever I sure at some point I did. I remember after losing my mother though, there were so many things to do. I was in charge of her estate, and then I had to start taking care of my stepfather who had Lewy body dementia.
Mm.
And I kind of understand the guilt when we're talking about that being a caregiver because you kind of, I felt guilty of feeling, I wasn't bothered. I felt very lucky to be the one to take care of him, but I also felt like, why me? Why am I the only one? Why hadn't anybody else helping me? But I going back to my mother, I don't know that I really took the time until later. Probably, honestly, it was probably even after my stepfather passed away 4 years later
Mhm.
that I probably grieved both of them. But I'm not one that likes to sit in it's uncomfortable, right?
Yeah, and I mean that's so normal too, is I think it's referred to as the closet of grief. So you go to like put away some other grief in the closet and it's overflowing when you open it. And then the grief and loss of other people or other things naturally comes up and kind of
Mhm.
forces us to look at it and process it at that time.
Yeah. So I'm gonna backtrack a minute, but so what got you interested in this? Because to be honest with you, when I think about working with the prison system and death row inmates and hospice patients, and then grief and loss and all that. It just sounds sad every day to work with people like this. I mean, what made you get into this?
Yeah, I mean, I think my path took some different pivots along the way, so it wasn't it wasn't my intention completely. And just hearing you read it all back, I mean, it does sound like so much loss and like darkness, but I found with the grief work that there was so much love on the flip side. And so it just feels like such beautiful work because, what's forward facing is the sadness and maybe depression and guilt and kind of those negative feelings.
Mhm.
But on the other side of it is kind of reminiscing about the person or kind of reviewing and processing, which can be really lovely. As far as death row inmates, I like a challenge and
That would be quite a challenge.
yeah, I thought the experience would be really interesting and just give me insight to people from different backgrounds and just kind of prepare me to work with, any type of person. And
Mhm.
they definitely have their own struggles going on and health issues and changes and absolutely like loss of people that they might have been in relationships with or chronic
Right.
illnesses going on. So, I mean, the population was more challenging, absolutely.
Were you
But
scared when you worked with any of those guys? I mean, well, was it
yeah,
guys or women?
it was all men. And yeah, I mean, it was interesting because when I went into it, I didn't, state what kind of population within the prison I wanted to work with. They kind of just place you, kind of like the
Wow.
military. Yeah.
Oh.
And, so I was definitely nervous. My nervous system was kind of jacked up starting off because they have them in these essentially cages, but they call them therapeutic modules, but they're
Uh-huh.
essentially like the size of a phone booth and it's a locked cage essentially. In
Oh.
a classroom, there's probably like nine more, like give or take, of those. And so I never felt physically unsafe.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, there was like the mental component and emotional component and kind of the risk of manipulation and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. So I mean
Yeah.
that helped me, I think, with my own boundary setting, emotional
Oh.
boundaries. It was like, yeah, just kind of thrown into that, which
Yeah.
was good for my own growth too.
Yeah. I love that because I definitely think we always grow when we are in tough situations. I've always said that. It reminds me of something I heard years ago. And this is when I have tough times. I think about this. If you plant a tree, a baby tree, and the weather's really easy and nice on it, it's not digging its roots down in. And
Mm,
if you plant a tree and it has to withgo like a harsh winter, then it really digs its roots down in and it becomes more stable. And so that when a storm comes or something, it's not going to get uprooted because those roots are so deep. And
mm,
I feel like the same thing. I always have to go back to that when I'm going through something tough or when I'm in a very uncomfortable position because I think that that is so right. Like that's when it makes us tough. And if life were always easy, and we know life isn't
mhm.
always easy. It's funny because I'm writing my youngest son is getting married this month in October. So we're recording this in
Nice.
October. I think it'll air in November. But anyway, and he's getting married like in a week and a half
Oh my
in
goodness.
Scotland, and I'm not going to be there. And I've like it's been kind of a little hard thinking about it, but I think this is the best thing for him and his fiance and just the families and everything. And so, but I started writing a letter to him about like, listen, life is going to be hard sometimes, and marriage marriage can be really tough. Everybody knows it's people that's listening to this is I'm on my third marriage. So, but it is those times that you survive something tough in your marriage, or maybe you don't survive it in your marriage. Maybe your marriage ends, which that's a whole nother grief thing that we need to touch on. But it does make you stronger. It does make you better. It makes you a better person. I always say I never regret anything because I like me today.
Mhm.
I wouldn't be me today if I didn't go through all the crap and hard stuff and bad choices that I even made. I even caused a lot of my own grief. Like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know,
I mean, it's like that's such a human thing to say, and I don't think that everyone owns up to that.
yeah.
I'm on the same, I'm right there with you. There's so many things that I look back on and I'm like, oh, if I just knew what I knew now,
Oh,
I could do it so much better. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't be here now. I
mhm,
wouldn't be in the situation that I am and have that insight and be able to look back. And so instead it's just a lot of self-compassion and yeah, during tough times or during like tough emotions, just asking
mhm.
myself, can I learn from it? Or if I do something I regret today, okay, I can't go back, I can't change it, but how can I grow from it and do it different next time? I'm not going to beat myself up over it.
Oh, so true. And I tell this to all my clients, and I've even said this on Instagram, I know. So the good times, I mean, we have great times in our life and they will pass. And the bad times do pass too. They do.
Yeah.
And, grief at first, I remember when I first lost my dad. I lost my dad when I was 28 years old. I'm 57 now. So my dad he's been gone as long as he was in my life, which is
Mm,
crazy to me. But I remember that pain, that just Oh, and it's not that I don't have that pain like I did then because it's been 28 years. So I don't have actually almost 29 now. I don't have the pain like I did. Again, I don't know. I think it took me a long time to process the grief when I had because I had three little kids.
mhm.
So, how do you try to get people to take the time and process that grief, or do they just come to it in their own time?
That's a very real situation. Depending on what we have going on in our life, we don't always have the luxury, maybe to go to therapy or the luxury to like sit in our grief because you have to take care of little kids. I mean, you're just doing the best that you can at that time. So I think an accessible kind of tool that I like to use is just giving yourself 20 minutes a day to feel whatever grief is coming up.
Mhm.
And then you can, tuck it away and move on with your day. And if it comes up again, that's okay. But at least you're allowing yourself this regular practice and this time to hopefully prevent it, just showing up on its own. But of course, with
Right.
grief, like it comes in waves. So sometimes we'll have the space to be able to sit with it and process it, and sometimes we won't, and that's okay
Mhm.
too.
And now that you're saying that, I'm like remembering back, there were some times that I would go in my closet and sit and pull out all these pictures of my father or letters he had written me. And I would just sit there and cry and cry and cry. And then I would like, okay, I've done. So maybe that was my grief. Yeah, that was probably my way of processing part of my grief, don't you think?
I think that sounds like a really healthy way to process.
Mhm.
And just like cocooning yourself in your closet, having that privacy to kind of reduce, the risk of worrying your kids. But it is a natural thing too. But yeah, it
Mhm.
sounds like you were going through your own
Mhm.
process with that.
Right.
So reviewing pictures or listening to music that they liked, figuring out ways to like honor them, around
Mhm.
holiday times and kind of coming up with new traditions. There's so many different like lovely ways to
Mhm.
go about it.
Yeah, it's funny that you say traditions. Thanksgiving is coming up. Thanksgiving, well, when I think of Thanksgiving, I remember a couple of things. One is my father loved Thanksgiving so
Oh.
much. That was like his favorite holiday because he loved eating. He loved all the food. And so the last Thanksgiving I had with him, it was at my house. Like I said, I had three little kids. They were 4 and 2, and I was pregnant. So I was still pregnant with my youngest one. And daddy could not, he had esophageal cancer, but we didn't know this at Thanksgiving. Okay.
Mhm.
So he would chew his food up and then it would get stuck and he would get up and move around. And I remember thinking, oh, Dad, you've got to go have this checked. You've got to.
Yeah.
And he had been having this going on for a while. He finally, after that Thanksgiving, went and got it checked and was diagnosed with esophageal cancer and then died like 3 months later. But so I hate Thanksgiving. I hate
Mm.
Thanksgiving. I never want a traditional Thanksgiving. And I end up having to do it a lot of times. And this Thanksgiving, I'm not doing a traditional Thanksgiving because I'm like, I do not want to do that. It's not what I want to do. And I'm wondering if that doesn't have a big part in that, right?
I'm sure. I'm sure. And I think, there's no right or wrong. You
Hmm.
have to do what works for you.
Right.
And what feels, I imagine kind of changing the tradition, not doing the regular Thanksgiving can kind of shake things up a bit
Hmm.
and kind of like allow for that refresh. And you can always figure out other ways to honor him,
Yeah.
during that time if you want to, or not during that time. The anniversary of like a cancer diagnosis or the
Hmm.
anniversary of somebody's passing can be a really emotional and difficult time to navigate too, anyways.
Yes. Well, so he passed away on April the 28th. Like I said, it was 1994. And fast forward all these years, I've been married now 8 years. Guess what day my husband's birthday is on?
The same
April
day.
28th. Yep.
Oh,
So now it's a day to celebrate my husband. Of course, my father never got to meet him, but that's kind of cool. And even more so, I focus on, so let's see, dad died April 28th, May, June. So 2 months later, almost to the day, my youngest son, was born June 29th, came out the spitting image of my father.
oh,
I mean, and has acted a lot like my father through the years. I mean, he's my protector, and he is like, that was one of the things I was writing in his note. And so as he reads it on his wedding day, but I think about those kind of things, that those are I always celebrate him on his birthday, but I always think about, again, I am convinced that God said I couldn't have both of these wonderful guys in my life. And so God gave me my youngest son because he knew I needed something to fill. And my youngest son, actually, his middle name is after my dad too, which is pretty special.
oh my goodness.
So,
Yeah, I mean,
so.
that's so sweet. I love
Mhm,
that.
mhm.
And it's almost like, your loved one, it's almost like your father too is kind of like, okay, I know you're going through a tough time.
Mhm. Yeah.
Hopefully this will be kind of like a sign or something that can help
Oh,
you
it
through
was
this.
so much like a sign. I mean, it helped my mother get through it because my mother and he had been married for, gosh, I don't even know how many years. And that was the love of her life. Luckily, she did have another love of her life. She remarried a year later, which was craziness.
Yeah, yeah.
But she did, and married my stepfather. But yeah. Okay, I don't want to spend too much more time on my dad, but anyway, but
Oh,
I mean, it was a big loss. And then losing my mother, that's a whole nother thing. Losing your mom, I think, too. Your mom is your mom, and she's like, she was my best friend. But one of the things I remember when I went through my divorce is it felt like a death, but nobody was calling. I mean, it wasn't like that at all. It wasn't like I was getting, food sent to me or anything like that. So, and that's a big loss for people.
that's a massive loss. I mean,
Mhm.
if you go from having somebody in your life for however many years and you're living together and you're cohabitating, cooking, you're planning around each other's schedules, and then all of a sudden you're without that, and you're without that support in whatever way that they provided, whether like emotionally
Mhm.
or anything.
Financially, to be honest with you,
Yeah.
my ex-husband, he was a big financial emotionally, he was never there for me,
Yeah.
but financially, he provided for our family, and then all of a sudden, I mean, he had to provide because I had to take him to court, but scary, you know, and then, like you said, it's even if you're in an unhappy marriage and even if you want this divorce, it still
Hmm.
is a loss of your dream.
Hmm.
I say this all the time. I did a whole podcast on this divorce thing. You don't, as a little girl, think, oh, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to marry and have children and get divorced.
Nope.
You
Yeah.
never think that. You never dream that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so yeah, and like figuring out how to let go of what you imagined,
Mhm.
for your life and with that person, and accepting that, that this is the best move for you, but that doesn't make it any easier to get through that period and all the loss that comes along with it. It is really unfortunate that it's not treated more as like a grieving process, because I imagine like the loneliness that it creates too, the anxiety and fear of like what's to come. And that's the time that you really need your support system to kind of rally around. And I've worked
So
with
true.
individuals who, we've talked about like, how do you ask your support system to help? Do they
Mm,
know that you need them right now? Because people oftentimes don't know, what you need until you tell them.
so true. So true. And we think, oh, I'm gonna be tough, or I was the one who made this decision, so I need to just handle it. I've gotten a couple of messages recently through Instagram for women who, after 30, one was 30 years, one was 25 years, their husbands just up and left them and the kids. I'm like, oh my gosh, and they just have a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry. Like, well, first it feels like rejection first, right? And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden they've left, and financially, and you don't know what's to come and so many things. So that is a good time to get in therapy. Unfortunately, if they're like me, if their husband has all the control of the money,
Mm.
guess what? It's harder to pay for stuff like that. But I will say my mother helped me tremendously financially until the courts made my husband pay. So you can go that route. Always ask a family member. People want to help you too, and they don't know how to help you.
Right. Right. I mean, even if it's, yeah, if it's money, if, helping with like transportation for your kids, like just kind of these
Mhm.
basic things that can just all fall on you as like a new single parent.
Yeah,
That you all of a
exactly.
sudden have to adjust to pet
Mhm.
care, being in charge of all the meals and cleanup. And all of a sudden, all of this is on you. And
Mhm.
it's really, I mean, a huge period to adjust to.
Yeah. Another thing that I've had a couple of people on my podcast recently with breast cancer recovered,
Mhm.
but just talking about this before breast cancer and after breast
Mhm.
cancer, that transition, even though they are cured and everything else, I know one of them said to me, there's always this little thing in the back of her head, like, could happen again. So I'm sure you work with clients like that too, right?
Yeah, I think it's so common, so normal again, and not everyone is thinking about it. I think the big impression on people in their life who don't really know that deeply what's going on is that, okay, well, she, wraps things up. She's
Mhm,
good to go. She's back to like her normal programming. So
mhm.
in my mind, there's nothing to worry about. We're good. But in reality, for any cancer survivor, anyone who's going through it, of course that's going to be in the back of your mind, because it's devastating to if you have to re-experience a diagnosis again, and just kind
Mhm.
of the uncertainty that comes with it. I think, a lot of people after the fact are going to be forever changed because that's going to be in the back
Mhm.
of their minds. And that's another thing that it's hard to kind of get that point across to loved ones and to, friends or acquaintances, because that's just so important that people understand that it's not simply over because she's
Mhm.
cured. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like it's still, um, a daily thing. One of my friends that I talked to, Kathy Williamson, the Middle Page blog, she has really made it almost, I mean, like anybody that's diagnosed with breast cancer, you will reach out to her.
Mm.
And so it really has changed everything about her life because, well, and she always says chemo's the gift that keeps giving. And so it adds to her menopausal symptoms and she
Oh,
can't take hormone therapy and just all this stuff. But it has become her mission too, which I love. Again, she turned her mess it into her message and has helped so many women walk through it. So, and I think, I think it goes back through getting on the other side of this grief. I mean, you have to go through it so that you can help others, and sharing is so important. I mean, I feel like that with my divorce. I make light of the fact that I'm on my third husband, but I do that because I'm not going to sit and beat myself up about the choices I made and things I did and everything else. And I think it helps people understand that we're all real. Like we all have things, right? There is no one person who has it all together, whose life is perfect, and we all go through things, but can, we can come out on the other side and be a better person if we take the steps to go through the grief or deal with the anxiety or whatever it is. I've had lots of therapy, Paige. I'm like,
I love it. Yeah.
my husband says that I love therapy, and I do love therapy. I do love therapy. I love trying to figure out why I do what I do, but I think that therapy is a good place to be heard, be validated. We need validation, and we don't need our friends going, yeah, he's such a jerk and you shouldn't, it's not about that kind of validation. We already
Yeah.
know that. But anyway, so tell me, you are really focusing in on grief and loss and life transitions and anxiety. Anxiety, that's a big thing because I have a lot of my clients with menopause that is one of the symptoms with menopause is anxiety. And that is not a fun place to be.
Not at all. I mean, it can, and apparently anxiety is just like anger. It's like a secondary emotion. So
Really?
beneath, yeah. So if you,
Makes sense.
yeah, if you compare it to an iceberg, this is what we do in therapy a lot. Like
Mhm.
anxiety is the tip of the iceberg. And then below the water surface are all of those other feelings that we're just like stuffing down that come up as
Mm.
anxiety. So naturally, talking about it, allowing yourself to feel those feelings can let us decrease that anxiety. And of course, there's going to be things in life that are heightening it. And
Mm.
sometimes, we definitely cannot control it, which can make it more anxiety inducing. But yeah, I mean, I think especially if somebody hasn't experienced anxiety in their life and they're experiencing it later with all these other changes that are happening,
Mhm.
that can kind of throw you in a tailspin as well.
Yeah, I think it's something like you don't even think of that as being a menopausal symptom. It's like, but I've experienced anxiety a little bit. I know when I have that, it's just like you said. I mean, I think that's very interesting. It's like that tip of that iceberg, like you've stuffed down other things. And one of the things I can feel my whole nervous system, my whole body, if I'm really, really anxious about something, or my whole body will just shake. In fact,
Mhm.
the first time I even realized this was something, it was so totally different, but I have to share this story because I think this is very interesting. It was very eye-opening to me. I'm not afraid of heights. I'm not afraid. I'll climb anything, do anything. And so maybe 10 years ago, my husband and I were dating and we went to Miraval Spa and he was afraid of heights.
Mm,
And they have all these like ropes course and different things that you can do. And I'm like, we're gonna do this thing where we climb to the top of this telephone pole, and we're
yeah.
gonna do it because you need to get past your, and your fear of heights. Okay. So we go down there with a group. It's like 6 people. And so they said, well, who wants to start? And I'm like, oh, we will. We'll start. We'll be first. Okay, here I go. So, he was like, okay, well, which one are you going first? I'm like, I'll go first. I'm not scared. So
Yeah.
I start climbing this ladder up so you climb the ladder and then you get to the pole and then you start climbing the pole. So I'm going and I'm moving pretty fast. And so I get to the top and there's this, I mean, honestly, I think it was like a 1x2 platform that now I'm supposed to climb up and get on top of it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I have nothing to hold on to, mind you. Now I am, hooked into a thing. And so if I fall, I'm still going to be okay. But I managed to finally get up on this platform and my whole body starts shaking. And I'm like, and I didn't feel it. I felt the shaking, but I didn't feel like I was anxious or anything. But my body was telling me, girl, you are. And I did yell down to my boyfriend. He was my boyfriend then. And I was like, do not come up here. Do
Don't do
not.
it.
Do not come, because all I could think of, as nervous as my body was, you are going to freaking push me off this thing. Like, do not. Well, he didn't listen. And he
Oh,
climbs up and he goes very slow because and he gets up there. And Paige, the moment I touched him, my body quit shaking.
mm,
And he climbed up and then we stepped off together. So we did it, but it was very interesting because afterwards we talked through it with, I guess they are trained therapy kind of. I don't know the guides out there, but
uh-huh.
the guy said to me, he said, we were talking about my experience, and he said, you moved so fast. You weren't enjoying the process at all. Because, see, I just like
Yeah.
to get through it. And he said, and then you got up there and you were like, do not come up here. But the moment you touched him, you started taking care of him. So
Mm,
you lost your own experience. It was, I'll tell you what, seeing my body react that way, it just was amazing. So I think when I get in tight situations, if I have somebody else to take care of, I'm good.
yeah.
But if I don't have anybody and then I have to deal with my own stuff,
Yeah.
that's so much harder. So much harder.
Yeah. Yeah. In that moment, it's like, okay, he's really scared of heights. I just went through this. I was freaking out. He's going to be freaking out. Let me just focus my energy on making sure he's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely makes a lot of sense. And
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to kind of push our own experience aside and just kind of survive through it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that happens a lot with like caregivers too.
Mm.
They're pushing their own
Yes.
experience and their own kind of feelings aside because they're just trying to survive through that period, and
Mm-hmm.
take care of that person.
So
So
true. So
yeah.
true. And I think that is, I've seen that a lot in my clients because, again, we're at this in between. We still have kids and then we're taking care of aging parents. And
Mhm.
so, it's like, what? Or even, I mean, I've even seen it when I was in a support group when my stepfather had Lewy body. I
Mhm.
saw, spouses taking care of the other spouse and how tough that was on them. And literally, the person who was the caregiver ended up, and this is one of the things I had heard and I knew, dying
Mm.
before the patient
Yeah.
because they weren't taking care of themselves. They weren't going to the doctor. The
Yeah.
stress on them, just, oh, it was just so hard to see that. So we have to take care of ourselves. We have to put our own oxygen mask on first. It's imperative. It's imperative.
Yeah, I mean, such like an eye-opening situation, and I've heard of experiences like that too. And that's like a huge thing in grief counseling, is really being like, okay, where can you elicit help? Where can you kind of like redirect different daily things that you need done so that you can have time to go for a walk, or
Mm-hmm.
not just get out and go to the grocery store. Like, you need to do more than
Right.
that. And it doesn't have
Right.
to be anything elaborate, but it's
Mhm.
just crucial to take care of ourselves and make time without feeling guilty for getting away from the house or wherever you are, taking care of that
Mhm.
person.
Yes.
So
Yes.
necessary.
Well, Paige, I could sit here and talk to you forever and ever about this subject, because I feel like that we both just get it. And I know people that are listening are like, yes, yes, but there I will say one thing I do hear a lot, yes, but I don't have help. I don't have,
Mhm.
I don't have anybody. There is help one way or another. You can get help. Ask your friends, ask your family. They want to help. They want
Yeah.
to help. I mean, they do. So do it. Ask them. Please ask them.
Ask them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, so let's tell everybody how they can find you. I want to make sure that they're following you on Instagram. Where can they find you on Instagram?
Yeah, Instagram is going to be Therapy with Paige, and I work for a group practice that's in North Carolina, but all virtual for now, called Mindspace Counseling.
Mhm.
I know we were talking about the holidays and grief, and I have an upcoming grief workshop
Ooh.
November 10th from 5:30 to 6:30 Eastern time. So that's available for people within North Carolina. Um,
Oh, awesome. So will that
yeah,
be online? That will be
that'll be
online?
online. Yeah,
Okay. So how will they find out about that? Can you send me the link or whatever to it? And we'll make sure and put that in the show notes.
that sounds
Okay.
great. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, Paige, thank you again so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. And guys, just know that it is normal. Grief is normal. Anxiety is normal. Life transitions, it's all normal. But you may need to go find a counselor to talk to, a therapist to talk to, somebody to talk to listen to you, to go through some of these things. Ask friends for help too. I mean, I just can't. And if you can't find any help, message me. Please message me. I'm going to
Yeah.
help you find some help because I'm very passionate about this subject. So thanks so much, Paige. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Deanna. I really enjoyed it.